Every once in a while, an object crosses the auction block that feels less like memorabilia, more like a message in a bottle. With Titanic, that feeling is always doubled. There are relics from 1912, watches that stopped near the moment the ship went down, menus printed for meals passengers never imagined would become history, and of course Wallace Hartley's violin, forever linked to the music of that night. And then there are relics of our modern Titanic, the world James Cameron rebuilt piece by piece for his 1997 film. Last year, the so-called floating door, anyone who knows or cares enough knows it's not a door, it's a wall panel, but I digress. That sold for more than $700,000 at auction. Other pieces, from the ship's wheel to Rose's final act dress, brought staggering numbers of their own. Now Heritage Auctions is preparing another offering, pieces tied to the Grand Staircase, the dining room, life vests, and more. We're going to talk about today the Cherub. But why do we chase these objects? Is it the history, Hollywood, memory, just that good old-fashioned Titanic nostalgia? Well, today on Titanic Legacy, we're stepping into that auction room to find out. Hello and welcome to Titanic Legacy, a podcast that explores Titanic's lasting impact through conversations with creative, interesting, and inspirational people, authors, artists, historians, actors, filmmakers, musicians, entrepreneurs, and more, who continue to keep the Ship of Dreams legacy not only alive, but thriving through their creative work, hobbies, storytelling, and conversations. I'm Paul Carganilla, your host, and today we get to have a fun chat about Titanic auctions with a guest who is a longtime communicator, civic leader, and member of the board of directors for the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. He's also the award-winning author of the critically acclaimed mystery thriller Upon This Rock, which received honors from the Independent Book Publishers Association and the San Francisco Book Festival. Mr. David Perry comes to this conversation not only with a front row seat to this remarkable upcoming auction, but with a storyteller's eye for why these pieces matter, why a chair, a life vest, a cherub, any fragment of a movie set can stir something so powerful in collectors, fans, and anyone who's ever been moved by Titanic. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the Titanic Legacy podcast, David Perry.
Well, I guess to quote John F. Kennedy after Marilyn Monroe sang him happy birthday in Madison Square Garden, I can retire after that intro. I mean, wow. Thanks.
No, thanks for being here. Thanks for reaching out. This was a classic tale of you just dropping me a message on Instagram and saying, hey, I'd love to chat about this upcoming auction if you have a moment. And I took a look at it and I said, yeah, let's do it. Before we get to the auction, I am obviously I started podcasting because I'm just so fascinated by inspiration and the creative process. I gleaned from the signature in your email that you are an author and creative and a storyteller. So let's just jump back and talk about that real quick. When did you start writing as a hobby or a passion?
Gosh, I mean, without exaggeration, in first grade, I remember Miss Wasicki, my first grade teacher, gave me one of those little tests to see what group you're going to be in for reading, Bluebirds, which was the big one. And they gave me this little pad with blocks of words, and I was supposed to make 4 sentences. And somehow, just instinctively, I turned those 4 sentences into a story. At which point, Miss Wasicki grabbed me, took me down to the principal's office, and said, "We're going to move him up." So I guess I've been telling stories all my life. And I have a couple books that have not yet been published, but my first published novel came out in 2020. It's called Upon This Rock, a murder mystery, won 2 awards. Thank you for that. My screenwriter in Hollywood, Rodney Vance, thank you very much. He's shopping it around. So anyone out there who wants a really great mystery, please call me. And I'm right now working on the sequel. which is, interestingly enough, set upon an ocean liner. And then the solution to that takes place in a tiny little town in Spain. And yes, for 40 years, I've been running my own PR and communications business. Our clients have included George Lucas. I was George's spokesman for 5 years. We're very excited about his new museum about to open in Los Angeles.
Wow.
The Port of San Francisco Chamber of Commerce, another Planet Entertainment, from big to small, including the running of the Olympic torch in 2008. And I had my own TV show for 10 years called 10% from 2008 to 2018. And now here I am, just like in the Titanic, talking to you fine people.
Where would we find that TV show, or where did it air?
It's on YouTube. It was on Comcast in Northern California. It had 350 episodes. It was a half-hour talk show, and I would interview people. And you can now find it on YouTube. But if you search youtube.com/David Perry Associates, that's my page, and they're all up there. Me
We
looking younger.
we will put a link in the description of this episode. Check it out and go back in time and check out some interviews by the interviewee. I love that when I get to speak with people as eloquent and camera savvy as you, but not only obviously you're from this world of public relations and storytelling, how did you tell us your Titanic origin story?
Well, I joke with people, Alfredo, my husband's heard it too many times, that sitting on the couch with my mother in our den in Richmond, Virginia, watching the black and white movie Titanic, the original one with Barbara Stanwyck and Clifton Webb. I said made me love ships, the Titanic, and gay all at once. It was just like boom. It was a triple header. And I became obsessed, like anyone who knows Titanic has that origin moment. My mother bought me a copy of A Night to Remember. I still have it when I was age 6. I couldn't get enough of it. Every book on the Titanic I checked out of the library at St. Paul's School. I went to museums. One day I actually called a survivor who was still alive, living in Richmond, Virginia, who I had heard on the local radio station. And I remember at the time I was 12, he was very polite. Those were the days when people had their phone numbers listed.
Yeah.
And he said, I do this interview every year on the radio because I don't want people to forget the Titanic. And he said, you seem like a really nice boy, but I do that one interview. It's just too hard for me to talk about. And that was the moment when, in a sense, I grew up. I realized this was a disaster that killed 1,500 people, not just a child's fascination. And it really did something to me. And then fast forward, 20 some years, I got the opportunity to realize a childhood dream. I worked my way around the world aboard ship. I wrote the newspaper for passengers aboard the Crystal Symphony, a beautiful ship still around. And during that time, I met Bill Miller, who I'm sure some of your listeners will know. He's called Mr. Ocean Liner, BillMillerAtSea.com. He's written over 100 books. What he doesn't know about ocean liner history just isn't worth knowing. He was just last night on board the Queen Mary 2 in New York Harbor, lecturing on ships as the tall ships came by. And we met aboard ship, and he said, you should do this. And he encouraged me to become a maritime lecturer. And so for the last 27 years, I go aboard ship and I natter on about ocean liners. And if I don't talk about the Titanic, people get really upset.
The conversation continues, and people, what fascinates me about Titanic is we can't talk about it enough. There are just so many stories, not only of the passengers and crew, but just anyone connected to it that are just fascinating. And that's why we still continue to podcast and dive in and dissect. And we're surrounded by people who are still passionate about it right now in the live chat. If you're watching on YouTube, say hello, shout out where you're watching from. And if you have any questions for Mr. Perry here, go ahead and drop them in as we are recording here. If we can work it in, I'd love to ask him your questions. Okay, so all of this to say, you've been a Titanic fan. You as long as you can remember.
60
How
years.
how are you connected to this upcoming auction?
Well, so Martin Bialis is the founder of Sea Global Entertainment. They're known for doing immersive exhibitions around the world. They did some Star Trek exhibits. Right now, they're doing the Sistine Chapel in Europe. And they did the first ever Titanic exhibit about the film. Martin actually partnered with James Cameron. And the exhibition opened at Wembley Stadium. I mean, it was massive, and the idea was to take people into the film. So you could go into the bow, you could stand where Rose and Jack, had that wonderful King of the World moment. And of course, one of the things that was featured is that iconic cherub, which I remember the first time I saw Titanic, and I've seen it 27 times, once in Greek. I literally started to cry because I said, here I'm looking at someone who was so careful in recreating Titanic that even the gold stripe, right at the top of the hull was recreated. The china, the way the wireless wires were positioned. I mean, it was clear that James Cameron had an obsessiveness about it. And I literally cried. It was like seeing a childhood dream. So I have followed all the exhibitions. I knew about Martin's. We got to know each other about 2 years ago. And he mentioned, oh, and I went in and actually saw in his house. I have a video of it. He had the Titanic cherub. And I said, is that a reproduction? He's like, no, no, no. James Cameron gave it to me to thank me for how successful the exhibit was. I was like, well, wow. I was just gobsmacked. So he's had it for many years. He's downsizing and he has decided to sell it. He says, I've had it now for almost 30 years. There's some other collector that needs to have it. It's verified. It was in the film. You can see Rose and Jack when he comes down in the tuxedo. They're right there. It's just an iconic, one of a kind artifact. And well, we're hoping that someone who really treasures it will take it into their home or their museum. We've already had some inquiries because there are other, as you now know, other Titanic exhibitions around the world. There are restaurants that love having a Titanic item because, as you well said, we can't get enough of Titanic. So this is an icon of film. It's an icon of James Cameron's film specifically, but it also is a tangible connection to the endless fascination, which is Titanic. And I have a lot of thoughts about why it still fascinates people. It's just incredible.
Give me some of those thoughts.
Well, when I lecture, and I always joke, when I start my lectures, I say, okay, hi guys, we're here in the middle of the ocean. Once we were actually in the Alaska glacier waters. There was an iceberg outside. And I said, you people want me to talk about Titanic? Are your meds off? I mean, really, what's going on? But all kidding aside, to me, of all the shipwrecks in history, all the maiden voyages, this one is like a Greek tragedy. New ship, the biggest, the cross section of humanity, from the richest to the poorest, from Astor to immigrants with, barely any money making their way to the new world. And when the ship hits, no one really takes it seriously. The band is playing, their bars are open, and the ship sinks, pardon me for saying this, beautifully. Most ships, when there's an accident, sink dramatically. I mean, look at the Empress of Ireland, 14 minutes, gone. The Lusitania, 18 minutes, gone. The Titanic took 2.5 hours, and up until the last 20 minutes, things seemed kind of normal. And this is my long winded way of saying why I think it still fascinates so many people. Pretty much every first class man on that ship, and certainly the officers, knew they were probably going to be dead in 2.5 hours just from hypothermia in the water. They knew there wasn't a ship close enough. And 2.5 hours is just enough time to really put one's life in order. I think it's just the most gripping, mythic tale of humanity. It's not about the ship only, it's not about the disaster. It's about the cross section of humanity that was on that deck that night and all the what ifs, as Walter Lord so famously talks about in his, seminal book, A Night to Remember, and then the sequel, The Night Lives On. What if the Californian had actually turned on their radio? What if the Titanic had run into the iceberg head on? What if, as Andrews wanted, there were enough lifeboats for everyone? On and on and on. It never ceases to fascinate me. And every time I give a lecture about it, I meet someone connected to the Titanic and I learn something new myself.
It's just a wealth, it's an unending well of stuff to talk about. Stories, the people stories, artifact stories. Um, every inch of that ship has a story to tell. And
Yeah.
now that it's at the bottom of the ocean, it's just how much longer will we be able to spend time with her in physical form, but she will never leave us as far as, the stories go. And I'm just shocked. Like, Cameron shot this movie 30 years ago,
Right.
and we've got an auction in 10 days here on Heritage Auctions with all of these amazing pieces. They got one of the pineapples from the staircase,
Right.
a life jacket. Some of the miniature chairs are up there. And this amazing cherub that you have. Do you have any idea, any inkling what it is expected to go for?
Well, I mean, yeah, as you rightly said, the famous, not door, but the famous, piece of wood that Rose and Jack ended the movie on sold for $750,000, I believe it was.
Mm.
So the starting bid for the Cherub is $25,000. We think it's going to go much higher. We have already had a pre-bid from someone. We don't know who it is, but someone has already put in a pre-bid of over $30,000. And people who are listening to this website now, this podcast now, can go and they can put in a bid or they can ask questions. And then the live auction will be in a few weeks. I believe it's July 13th. But we think that the interest is going to be very high.
Yeah. Do you have any pieces from the film or the wreckage?
I do not. I'm a collector of books. I've got a number of very rare books, including one of my favorites, a 1912 edition of Morgan Robertson's famous book, Futility, The Wreck of the Titan, which eerily, as I'm sure many of your podcast listeners know,
Yeah.
had his ship, written in 1898, called the Titan, on its maiden voyage in April, hits an iceberg and goes down. Really, really freaky stuff. And the book came out in, there you go, I knew you'd have it,
There it is.
in the edition that came out in 1912. I have a copy of. I have a couple of
Cool.
rare menus, not from the Titanic, but from early Edwardian liners, and just many, many books, over 450 books on ocean liner history. I've already put in my will that when I die, they're going to be donated to the Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia, which I think is and I've been to many maritime museums, but I think the Mariners Museum in Newport News is one of the best.
I hope, and this is just me being selfish, but I hope a museum purchases the cherub as well that can
I do
share it
too.
with, share it with folks who come to see it. I'll share my collection with you if you like.
Yeah, please.
Movie props specifically. This is one of my favorite. So in the first class dining room when it's going under, you see the shot of the teacups floating.
Yes.
So Cameron had a tough time actually making the porcelain cups float. So they actually molded wax versions of them to use on the movie set. So that shot you see are these wax pieces that they made for the film. Dave Condon, one of the famous
Yeah.
uh, survivors, I'm not survivors, rescuers of the movie set and props, actually had this in his shop. So I got that for Christmas one year.
Have
Um,
you been down? Have you been down to Rosarito? I am dying to go down and see it.
I haven't because I'm told it's all locked up and you can't
Yeah.
get into on set anyway, or not on set, but on the grounds anyway. I had a couple of gifts given to me at this past April on the Queen Mary from folks who worked on the film. Judy Presidency gave me a piece of coal from the movie set, not the actual
Cool.
wreckage,
Right, right.
and decking from the movie set, not the
I love
wreckage.
it.
And our friend collector Kevin Saucier, I guess he has tons of this rope just sitting around from the Cameron set, and he brought me a slice as a gift. Very, very kind. My biggest piece and what got me into like collecting was a gift from my wife. It is actually the capstan crane wheel that
Cool.
um, Kate stops at to make
Yeah.
where she makes her decision to jump. And there are obviously several of these on the set, but I was actually able to pause it in like the new high def Blu-ray. And these are handmade, they're not
Yeah.
like back in the day where they had manufacturers making them, but you can actually see I was actually able to match up very specific little details in the grooves of the welding that I was like, wow, yeah, this is the
This
one.
is the
It's
one.
super
Well,
cool.
listen, you live in Los Angeles. We
I
live in
did.
Palm Springs. I'll come and visit you. We will find a way to get into that set in Rosarita. It's not that far over the border. Between you and me, we can sweet talk our way in. I think what a podcast that would be.
I would love to. And let's bring a couple of people who worked on the movie with us. Um, Speaking of Palm Springs and Los Angeles, we have friends checking in from across the country here. Tris from Minneapolis, St. Paul saying hello. Seth
Boy,
from Illinois says hi. And would you mind sharing where you are right now?
I am right now in a little town in Andalusia, south of Spain, called Grazalema. It's about 1,500 people. It's one of the white villages of Spain, Los Pueblos Blancos. And my husband and I fell in love with it in 2019. And I was just finishing edits on my first novel, but I was already thinking about a sequel. And while we were here, I ran across a local tragedy, sadly, a massacre of 15 women during the early stages of the Spanish Civil War.
Whoa.
And I'm a nut about history, and I just couldn't get enough about what this story was about. And over the next several visits, I actually met people who remembered the massacre, met family members. It was just a compelling story to me, kind of like Titanic is a compelling story. And more than the massacre, I became fascinated by this town and how beautiful it is and how they have come out of this tragedy. And so the result is my new book, which I've promised my publisher will be finished by September 1st, is a murder mystery set aboard ship. And three of the main characters are centenarians, people who, when this massacre happened, were young teenagers. So the book is not about the massacre. The book is about this murder that gets solved on this ocean liner crossing the Atlantic. And the solution is in the minds, the memories of these three people who were centenarians. And I think that's the other reason I like James Cameron's movie Titanic. I have known numerous centenarians over the years. I met a 103-year-old survivor of Normandy on board the Queen Mary 2 on
Wow.
the 80th. He was on his way to the 80th anniversary of Normandy. And I went to all his lectures. I met him. When the Queen Mary docked in Southampton, there were all these other veterans in their 70s and 80s. They took the elevator up to the second floor. He walked up the steps. I was like, this guy's amazing. His name is Steve Melkinoff. He's 105 years old, and his memory is better than you, me, and all your listeners put together and twice on Sunday.
Yeah.
So I say that because when people hopefully read the new book and they say people over 100 aren't that sharp. Frankly, I think if you live to be 103, 104, 105, I think the fact that you are that sharp is one of the reasons you live that long. So I've always been fascinated by centenarians, and I thought the way that the old Rose was portrayed in Titanic was just terrific.
Mm. Yeah. My grandfather-in-law lived to 102, and he was just so with it all the way to the end. We asked him what the secret was, and he says, "You just don't worry. Don't worry about anything. Just roll with life and don't stress." And I'm like, okay, that's a great words to live by. Um, we have a listener live streaming from Sweden. And
Wow.
Rebecca has a question. And this is kind of like a sensitive subject. I'm sure you've gotten the question before, but what do you think survivors would think about our auctions today, or family members of the victims? What do you think how would they feel about us auctioning off not just pieces of the movie set, but like stuff that was recovered from the wreckage?
Well, I think it's a nuanced question. Thank you for it. I think there's a nuanced answer. For instance, I am not a big fan of Titanic tourism, going down to the wreck. I think the couple that got married sitting on the bow, I hope they're not listening. I hope they're happily married, but I just thought that was so tacky, as my grandmother would have said. When I went to the first exhibit that my husband surprised me with when it was in Atlantic City and the Tropicana Casino, I didn't have high hopes. I thought this is going to be really schlocky. And I was so moved. There was the big piece, which I actually reached out and touched before they had lasers protecting it. I was so moved not only by how sensitively the artifacts were presented, but by the things I learned. I didn't know until that exhibit, for instance, that US dollars weren't consistentized, that they were from different banks around the United States. And I learned this because they showed some of the money that had been brought up. So I think survivors or family members, if they know that the artifact is being treated respectfully and is going to be used to tell that incredible night's story, I think they'd be fine with it. I'm not so big on pieces of coal coming up and things like that, although I understand why people want to do it. I wonder sometimes if Robert Ballard doesn't think I really should have taken salvage rights. I
Mm.
mean, OMG. But Titanic International Incorporated, I think that's the name of the company that has salvage rights. In my opinion, and I've seen numerous iterations of the exhibit, and I've been to Belfast 3 times. I think in general, most of the things that I've seen exhibited and most of the auctions have presented the items very sensitively. I know the great great grandson of Isidor Strauss. Ida and Isidor Strauss.
Yeah.
He came into my office one day, saw a book, and he said, "You know about the Titanic?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "My great grandfather was Ida and Isidor Strauss." So I don't think he was displeased when that watch was sold because by being sold and all the publicity it got, it once again ignited interest in the story. And every time I lecture aboard ship or I lecture at various yacht clubs in the San Francisco Bay Area, I'll meet some kid like me, 6 years old, who is just wide eyed. And you can see his parents there going, I don't know how this happened. But he can't get enough of Titanic. So the night is mythic. And I think that is the right word to use. It has become part of our mythological vocabulary.
I think, yeah, everything you just said, and just the fact that it's a connection to that myth and a physical connection to something that so many people hold so passionately in their hearts, and just being able to own a piece of it is it feels nice, even if it's just a 1 foot long cross section of a rope that who knows where it was on the ship when the movie
Yeah,
was
you're
filmed.
making me seriously jealous here, Paul. So I'm just letting you know.
It was there though. I say this all the time, like to be a fly on the wall when Cameron was making that film, just to be present to see how it all happened. These pieces were there, and the stuff that we're bringing up from the bottom of the ocean. I saw the big piece a couple of years ago at the Luxor in Las
Right.
Vegas. Just being in the room with it, there's
Yeah,
an energy. You feel it. It feels like a living, breathing
totally.
being telling its own story. And um, obviously, it wasn't just there, but that's a piece of Titanic. And I think
Oh,
it's so
yeah.
important to preserve and keep that. That's why I'm hoping somebody at a museum buys this cherub. Um, and so lots of people can enjoy it into the future. And out of all the museums, what has been the one thing? Was it the big piece, or was there something else? What stands out the most to you as far as something that was there that night that you have been in the same room with?
The big piece, pretty much, but then also I saw a deck chair that had been picked out of the water. And instantly I thought about how when I'm on an ocean liner, like when I was on the Queen Mary 2 crossing, I find my deck chair, I get a steamer rug. I get really upset that they still don't serve bouillon at 11 o'clock. I actually wrote Cunard a letter and said, you guys got to keep serving bouillon at 11 o'clock. They just looked at me like that's crazy. But I find my deck chair, and I know what that is like, that incredible pleasure of watching the ocean go by. And
Mm.
then thinking, what if I had been on Titanic that night and I was clinging to that floating in the water? It really did something to me just to see that. I've not seen the violin, Wallace Hartley's violin, but I think to see that would really just be, I mean, that story above all. They all went down and by all accounts stayed at their posts. That to me would be amazing. And of course, no one knows anymore where they are, but somewhere, all those lifeboats that Carpathia unloaded when she pulled into New York City Harbor, and there wiping away the word Titanic from them, those
Yeah.
went to other ships.
Yeah.
Somewhere there is a Titanic lifeboat. I just think one day it's going to pop up somewhere.
I had the pleasure of visiting the Belfast Museum a couple summers ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. But in the last room there, that big with the where they've got it hanging from the ceiling, and the big grand finale room, I would say in the museum, they had a deck chair. I wonder if it was the same one, just a
Could have
complete
been.
deck
Yeah.
chair. They had Wallace's violin and the cup that Molly Brown gave to Captain Rostron. They
Oh.
The Happiness
Wow.
Cup or something like that.
Yeah, I've been to Molly Brown's house now 3 or 4 times. Whenever I'm in Denver, I make a point of it. I just, she's probably the most famous one we remember, but all these other stories, more and more, I'm fascinated by, for instance, the Chinese immigrants that a lot of people don't know about. I've talked to people at the Chinese Historical Society in San Francisco. They're like, you know about them? I'm like, yeah, they said very few people do. Or from San Francisco, Dr. Washington Dodge, who survived with his family, and then a few years later, so overcome with survivor's guilt, committed suicide. That happened several times.
Yeah.
I lectured at the San Jose Fairmont on the 100th anniversary, so 2012, and they recreated the whole dinner with the menu. 12 courses went on. And I had set it so at certain points in the dinner, I would say, okay, well, this is the moment on ship's time, the Titanic hit, that sort of thing.
Mm.
And at the end of the dinner, a woman came up to me and she said, God, thank you. That was so fascinating. And wow, of course, this was an amazing dinner. It was the last dinner aboard the Titanic. I said, yeah, but they didn't know it was going to be the last dinner. That's just how people ate them.
Yeah. Wild. Um, well, we have this has been an amazing conversation, and I
Thank
think
you so much.
we need to continue it, and we're definitely going to need an update. But tell us again one more time before we leave, where can people find this cherub, and how can they check it out?
Well, the easiest thing to do is if you go to my website, which is very easy, davidperry.com, and it's in a link called Newsroom. That's where all my news releases are. I will be happy to send you the exact link. There you go, under news, and they're all my news releases there. And down is the one on the Titanic coming up shortly. And that has all the information about where to click, where to call, and how to bid. And then also, for those of you who are interested in murder mysteries, you can also buy my book there or at any independent bookstore in the world.
Love it. Well, Mr. David Perry, thank you so much for joining us. And any last closing thoughts?
I just want to thank you for keeping the dream alive and understanding the importance of not only the history of Titanic, but the importance of history in general and how it can really enliven our lives. So thank you for this podcast.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. And thank you to everybody out there live streaming. Thanks to everybody who's listening on your favorite podcast platform. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe if you're not yet. Give it a good rating, leave a positive review. It'll help us find more people who share this in their heart's fire. Let's say thank you one more time to our guest, Mr. David Perry.
Ahoy!
Thank you for sharing your story with us, and thanks again to everyone for tuning in. Until the next episode, seize the day, follow your heart's fire, and make each day count. Thanks so much, everyone.